Tonight we'll be listening and learning and then discussing, as you will, about counsel practice. And I'm humbled and flattered and really appreciative. My friend Jared Seide, who is the executive director of the Center for Counsel, has agreed to come share his time and his heart with our little sangha here in Boulder and elsewhere. So, Jared, thank you so much. Uh, and I'm going to save all the time for him to talk, and we'll have time for questions and answers and comments as well. So, be sure to participate if you'd like. Beyond the work Jared is doing now as ED of the Center for Counsel, and he's going to tell you about the Center for Counsel. Jared's a member and practitioner at the Zen Center of Los Angeles, which is really, if I can use this term, kind of the mothership for the White Plum Sangha. And Jared has long and deep intertwined history with Zen Peacemakers, going back quite a ways as well. If he'd like to, he can tell you about that if it's part of what he'd like to talk about. The only thing I want to just put in here is some of you have experienced counsel before, and some perhaps have not. And I'd like you to regard it as really a core contemplative practice. And it certainly is within Zen Peacemakers. I experience it very much that way. And that as you listen to Jared talk about counsel, to appreciate that it incorporates and embodies and manifests all three of the tenets: not knowing, bearing witness, and taking action. All three of those are present and active when we do counsel together. So keep that in the back of your mind. And with that, I'm going to mute myself, Jared, and I'm going to hand it to you again with big thanks and appreciation for you sharing so generously with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. I'm so grateful for the invitation. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me, Jeff, and thank you for your practice. Thank you for your presence today. Before I sort of start, I always like to start with some kind of poem or something. I'm now realizing I might have done this before with some of you at Zen Peacemakers, but I love this particular poem. I'm going to just read it to begin, if that's all right with you. It's by Yehuda Amichai, and it's called "From the Place Where We Are Right." From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. Thank you for listening to that. I love that piece, and I think it grounds a lot of what we are talking about here. There's so much promise. There's so much potential and power and joy in the practice of not knowing when we let go of being right, when we speak and listen to each other and allow ourselves to be moved to action. So in this way, I would say that counsel is an expression, or it's maybe the embodiment of the three tenets in a lot of ways, certainly for us. So my name is Jared Oceanside. I am the executive director of Center for Counsel. I guess I have about 30 minutes. I want to make sure there's time for you all to ask questions. I don't know if there'll be answers, but I'm sure there'll be good questions. I'll try to tell you a bunch about what it is we do at Center for Counsel, how the nature of counsel informs every step we take, everything we do within this organization and in the world, with all sorts of folks, many of whom are at odds with one another and under-resourced. And I want to bring in the voices of some of our friends and allies and teachers who have really helped me understand and led me in my practice of counsel. Folks in prison, folks who are in law enforcement, all kinds of different folks. And then we'll have some questions. And unfortunately, we don't have time for counsel today. I hope that you will have an opportunity to practice either within your Sangha. If you're interested, the Center for Counsel offers online counsels all the time. And so we have lots of opportunities for you to sit in counsel. I hope you'll have a chance to do that, if not in person, online. Center for Counsel is based in Los Angeles. The mission is to deliver programs and trainings that promote communication, enhance well-being, build community, and foster compassion. We do this with teachers and kids in schools. We do this with community-based organizations throughout their staff. We do this with doctors and nurses in hospitals and employees in tech firms and businesses, and with incarcerated folks. I just spent 2 days in Folsom Prison, Saturday and Sunday, and yesterday the circle that surrounded me was full of extraordinary folks, and I'll talk a little about that. And with police officers now, which feels really important and relevant. The evolution of our work really parallels the growth of the Zen Peacemakers in a lot of ways. If you don't know, Joan Halifax founded the Ojai Foundation in 1979. The Ojai Foundation was a place for dialogic practices to be explored and studied and practiced and celebrated and codified. And she brought, at the time, a succession of amazing teachers from her work, from Joseph Campbell to R.D. Lang to Thich Nhat Hanh to Wallace Black Elk and Grace Spotted Eagle. Extraordinary assortment of wisdom carriers from across the spectrum, really, to kind of work with how it is we can show up together, honor each other, and really be with the emerging collective wisdom. Bernie and Jishu came up to, I'm sure you are familiar with Bernie and Jishu, as they were in the process of sort of generating this idea of Zen Peacemakers and the Bearing Witness retreats. They were part of the workshops at the Ojai Foundation in the 1980s, and counsel came to the White Pluma Sangha in the 90s. The Zen Center of Los Angeles had some very tumultuous years in there in the 90s. And after the passing of Maizumi Roshi, there was a great need to find a way to bring the community together, to find practices that would enable us to meet each other again and to find commonality and to find love and care and respect and create communication such that we can collaborate and build together. Council played a role in what was happening in Los Angeles. And I think Bernie at the time realized that this idea of Zen peacemakers creating, bearing witness to Auschwitz and later to so many other places really required a container for us to be with what is emerging for us authentically and to listen to each other as we undertook the plunge to bear witness to great suffering in the world. And so while Bernie was thinking of this, I think in Los Angeles there were all kinds of other things going down. It was a tumultuous time. While this was happening at the Zen Center, I had a daughter at a school in Los Angeles that was falling apart. The Rodney King riots had wreaked havoc and people were tense. The school was a scary place with all kinds of bullying and mistrust. And as a parent and as one of the leaders of the governing board of the school, I was thinking, what could we do to find our way back to community? We heard that the Ojai Foundation had created or had codified these practices, and could it work in a school like ours? And sort of to compress the story, what happened when we brought the practice of counsel to this very fraught environment of an elementary school was miraculous. I got to watch a community go from a tremendous amount of distrust and tension and anger to what became for me the embodiment of beloved community. We were able to put the kids, to put the future, to put what we aspire to be together at the center of the circle, literally. And so the stakeholders, the parents, the neighborhood, then the teachers began to practice counsel together, to bring it into the classrooms, to really permeate the culture. I watched my daughter become a writer. I watched her find in the stories of the kids in her class, you know, what makes people tick, what motivates the bully to be a bully, why that friend has been down in the dumps, why somebody is behaving the way they behave. I think that Sophie found for herself a voice in the practice of counsel, and it totally sold me. So I shifted my engagement in the entertainment industry to look at how it is that this authentic storytelling practice could bring community together. And so I went to work for the Ojai Foundation. I decided this was where I had to be. I learned how to practice. I became a trainer. I became the coordinator of the Center for Council Training, and helped to build programs that would eventually branch off. We split from the Ojai Foundation to form Center for Council, and found that there was so much work to be done bringing the practice of counsel not just to schools but beyond schools, um, to community groups, into the prisons, into law enforcement. About this time, Bernie kind of came back around. He asked to meet with me, and we talked about the fact that these bearing witness retreats to Auschwitz really needed containment. We needed training. We needed to understand what it meant to hold space in a good way so that folks who were bearing witness could feel like they could arrive in a space and feel vulnerable, feel engaged, and be able to find their authentic voice and listen into the stories of others. And so we developed a training protocol to support all of the bearing witness retreats, first to Auschwitz, then to Rwanda, then to Bosnia, then to Pine Ridge, and to bearing witness to homelessness. And the practice of counsel became a foundational piece of what it was to take the plunge in these bearing witness retreats. They became very rich, and folks who experienced counsel as they went on these retreats felt that this was something that needed to be part of their lives. And so we were able to work with not only the White Plymouth Sangha and various sanghas around the world, but we were able to expand what we did as an organization in Los Angeles. I will say that in all of these settings, we believe that easing suffering begins with going beyond being right and making the other wrong. There is something about how we shift to listening from the heart that enables us to meet each other in a space that's not about all the ideas we have about the other. As we practice it, counsel is about coming together to offer regard, to listen without judgment, to go beyond the place where we are right, and to speak authentically. And so what this means for us in all the trainings we do, whether it's a school or a police department or a prison, is to talk about these basic building blocks of creating this kind of container. And they're quite simply 5 elements that keep showing up. They're a circle, a center, a threshold, intentions, the 4 intentions, and a way to close the council. Being in circle gives us an opportunity to see who's there, to show up in a way where everyone gets a good seat. You know, there's no preferred, there's no VIP seating in a circle. Everybody has a place to sit, and everyone's voice is heard. Every presence is honored. We're all connected in this whole. We get to understand that collectively we represent a thing. And so whether this circle exists with a bunch of chairs or zafus or backjacks, or it's in a Zoom, or it's maybe through the US mail, which is how we manage to keep our groups in prisons going. It's a long story, but that's been really extraordinary to see that the nature of circle can be something we can hold in our heart, and we can create in such a way that each person is really seen as a critical seat in a circle, each voice being important in that. The center exists in every council such that we can take the time to remember what it is we all hold dear, what is precious to us, what feels like it is our common ground. We actually enact a center by creating symbolic items, a way in which we actually can bring this intention into actual items that hold the important stories of our life. And whether it's a flower or a glass of water, or maybe it's the item that we create as a team in a company or a service we provide, maybe it's a story that holds great significance that's represented by an item that we keep in our pocket or in our wallet. There are things that we can actually place in the circle that remind us and that kind of embody that which feels real and feels authentic to us. The threshold, the 3rd element of counsel, is an understanding that life is crazy, that there's so much going on, there's so much distraction. We are so overwhelmed with information from every angle. It becomes so fast and so loud. Sometimes we need to step away and step in a good way to a place where our intention is truly to offer regard and to be authentic. And so minding that threshold is a critical part of counsel. Stepping in consensually, nobody falls into counsel or is coerced into counsel. We all agree that we're going to enter into a space with intention. And those intentions, as you probably know if you've been around this world, are to speak and listen from the heart, and to be lean and to be spontaneous. We can go on and on about this, and I love to talk about it, but I would say that listening from the heart, if you take a walk in nature, you can't help but behold some extraordinary things that you don't have to agree or disagree with. When you hear the sound of the wind in the trees, and you hear the sound of the hummingbird, or maybe the waves at the ocean, and you're aware of the waves, and it tells you something about the surf without you having to agree or disagree with the waves. You don't have to agree or have a stance or have an opinion about the wind and the trees. You can listen and you can hear and you can understand something about the weather. This kind of listening in nature reminds us that it's possible, but often with each other. There are so many things we apply to who that person is in our mind, to their gender, to their age, to who they voted for, what their politics are, how much money they have, what they're wearing, who they remind us of. There's so many things that begin to sort of pile up that we begin to sort of constrict this aperture, and we see them through like a little space of what's left after we've made a whole bunch of decisions about who we think they are. And what if we didn't? What if we set aside everything we think we know about the person in front of us and just hear what comes out of them and bring our curiosity and our open-heartedness rather than all our thoughts about who they are? Similarly, is it possible to speak in a way that gives us the chance to say what's really here? The speaking that we recognize that we do, that is agenda-driven, the speaking that it sort of is intended to get you to do something or to get you to stay away or to achieve a result, is often the kind of speaking that we do. But what if we surprise ourselves with just putting words to what's here, what's fresh and new in the moment? What would happen if we allowed ourselves to speak that way? This is such a promising and extraordinary generative way to be with one another. That intention holds so much promise. Being lean and spontaneous are a way for us to really focus this on the present moment and not get distracted by trying to rehearse the perfect thing. We're able to trust in the moment what comes. And in doing that, we stay present and we're conditioned by the things that are said in the circle. So these four intentions, gosh, they hold so much. It's important that we close the council at the end and don't forget that we step away in a good way from this time together. In stepping away, we make some decisions about the fact that, hey, that was a pretty cool thing. I want to keep that well. So this idea of confidentiality, this idea of honoring that space comes into play. And it's not because I ever said counsel is a safe space or counsel is confidential. I would never say that to you or to anyone. Counsel is not a safe space because I say it is. Counsel becomes a safe space because you all make it that way, because a group decides this is important. And as we look into each other's eyes and as we offer regard, we invite this kind of vulnerability with our presence and with our listening. May it be a safe space, and may it be something that we can hold as a precious space, but not because anyone told you that or a facilitator kind of explained that that's the way it's going to be. I believe that this is the embodiment of the three tenets, to listen from the heart, to set aside everything we think we know about the other, and open our hearts to the true nature of what is in front of us, to be moved to say and do what feels alive, what's based on true presence and is emerging in the moment. That's our innate human goodness. I think as we look around and we encounter so much suffering as we bear witness to, for example, mass incarceration, the human cost, systemic racism, and the inequities and the injustices of the criminal justice system, we see so many places where counsel could be of benefit. We just need to listen to the stories. Is it possible for us to enter that space? This is what led me to think, well, the prisons are places where folks are really longing to be seen and to have a practice that enables them to recover their humanity. I want to just go right now to their voices. These are some folks who, all of whom have been part of our work in prisons, and all of whom are now free and we're part of our community out in Los Angeles. But have a look, if you would, for a second, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Counsel, it's really hard to explain counsel, because it's like when you get involved in it and you're open to the process and you speak from the heart, it just does something to you. Most of the time when I've finished counsel, I've always felt lighter. I've always felt more joyous.
Center for Counsel allows us to feel like we're human beings, not just inmates, not just numbers, not just a statistic. We're actually people that, we rely on one another now. We build bonds.
Coming from the background that I come from, which is a gang background, and being caught up in that lifestyle, you become that person because of certain things that happen in your life, and counsel helps you learn to discover that true you, that part of you that God created, of who you really are. Someone, I believe, who's loving, someone who's caring, compassionate. That's what the human spirit is, and that's what I believe counsel has helped me bring out.
Most of us that are in prison have a struggle with emotions. I knew for me, I didn't understand anything but anger. So being in here, I learned how to feel, just genuinely feel someone's story, feel someone's pain, and I understood, what am I feeling right now? And then I would start analyzing it, like, okay, that's pain, that's sorrow for this guy for what he's been through. I've been desensitized to things that normal people wouldn't witness or be a part of. And this has almost resensitized me to be more human again, to feel what that person is feeling, because a lot of times in prison you'll mock someone who shows weakness. And in here, it's almost like a strength to see, man, that guy's hurting, but he's willing to put it out there. There were some things that happened to me, obviously, that weren't good. And this has kind of helped me release those things. When I come to counsel and I talk about something that's hurt me in the past, I don't carry that alone anymore. I give it away. It's like, all right, this is something that I was carrying to my mid-20s, and now I'm sharing with a group of men. And I think the reason why I can do that is because everyone does it. So it kind of really put me in a place where I could be vulnerable and a place you're not supposed to be. And I think that's truly one of the most important things, is to be able to talk about your pain, what you've been through, because most of us numb it with drugs or violence. It actually builds my confidence and gets me comfortable with who I really am. The truth is, I never, I knew that I had the life sentence, but to me, I would not accept that that's what was going to be my final outcome. I've learned so much about human emotion and the things that I just was completely disconnected from. But counsel helped me empathize, learn compassion. All it takes is for two people in that group to share to change the whole dynamic. You hear someone become vulnerable that's comfortable in counsel, and it puts everyone else's guard down, and it's like, man, what he just shared was pretty real. Every time I go to counsel, I tear a piece of my trauma, my experience, my pain, and I put it in the middle of that circle. And I allow each one of the men inside that circle to go ahead and take a piece of it from me. Each person shares their experience and their story, puts it in the middle, and then we all leave carrying someone else's burden, so to speak. I'm willing to carry it for you. And that's what I get from the counsel. There's no script for it. It's authentic.
I think anytime you talk in such a manner where you can listen, know that you're listened to, appreciate and understand each other a little bit more, I think your chances for resolve are much higher. And I think that's what counsel does.
What extraordinary folks these are. I just spent 2 days with a whole bunch of new folks in a prison in Folsom. It's amazing to sit in a circle and bear witness to courage and vulnerability. I think the rehabilitation process is about stepping away from a world you have known, you think you have figured out as what is right and what is wrong, into not knowing. And folks need tools, they need practices, they need skillful means to be able to really attend to this moment of shifting to not knowing from a life in which you were told what is right and what is wrong, often to your detriment and to the detriment of society. They learn to be vulnerable, they learn to open their hearts with each other and to imagine the kind of folks they want to be moving forward. This weekend, men came in who were part of rival gangs. There'd been a lot of violence at Folsom. By the first lunch, they were starting to eat together, which is unheard of when you mix races like that. And by the second day, they were talking about just being able to say hello on the yard would shift everything, because so much violence happens based on having to adhere to these very, profoundly us and them kind of lines that are drawn in prisons. The expansion of these programs has been amazing. All of those guys you just saw got grants of parole. They all came out. Mitch bought his first house and is now doing amazingly in a job that he's had 3 promotions already. They're very successful. These are lifers with a life sentence, not imagining there was a next chapter. And they found it with each other, which blows me away. And counsel looks very different everywhere it shows up. As those of you who are familiar with Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication, you have to speak into the listening. So when we talk about why we need programs in prison, we talk about impacting dynamic criminogenic factors. And we talk about the data we have studying the way in which these factors shift as a result of this program. When we talk to healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses, we talk about mitigating burnout. We talk about secondary trauma. We talk about depersonalization and what happens when you stop seeing people and only see conditions. In schools, it's about social emotional learning and empowering curiosity and the voices of the children. In community-based organizations, there's so much stress on folks that need to do so much with so little. And in policing, my goodness, this is the amazing work now that I'm also really eager to share with you. And I promise there'll be time at the end, but gosh, we have to talk about this. These are folks dealing with a landscape of suffering. Everywhere they turn, there is suffering. The stress is overwhelming. They become dysregulated. Their sympathetic arousal is out of hand, and their maladaptive approaches to dealing with that sympathetic arousal is putting them in worse straits with all kinds of acting out behavior. Their health and wellness is at risk, but so is their judgment and discernment. And so what affects the community is the fact that they are completely out of their right mind, so to speak. What happens when we bring awareness and presence? What happens when we talk about a relationship with your body, with your mind, with your emotional regulation, with your spirit, with your colleagues, with your loved ones, and then ultimately with the community, is something begins to shift in how they understand their jobs and how it is that being policemen can align with something honorable and not just something hated by the communities that they police. I gotta just play another short clip from these guys because I think you're gonna appreciate it, and then we'll come back and talk about it again. These are some extraordinary things that have happened. Let me see if I can get this one to play. I think you'll like it.
And talking about and debriefing and sharing. You don't walk away from a homicide. You don't walk away from seeing somebody's life being taken. That stays in your reel in your mind. How do you take care of yourself when those things happen? Getting in a council and talking about and debriefing and sharing. It helped me slow down and calm down.
Let's be frank, I think this uniform represents oppression to some people in this community. With this kind of practice, I see the value in it. I know it has made amazing difference in many people's lives.
I thought it was just going to be lecture. I didn't think we were going to get into the whole, talking and expressing and, giving someone their turn to speak.
When I walk in and I see stuff like that, I'm like, oh man, what did I get myself into?
I remember in the beginning, nobody will want to be first. Nobody wants to be first to grab this little thing and speak how they're feeling or who they're going to dedicate it to. That's the first step. Once that first step happens, the rest is easy.
I was shocked at how much the officers were able to really express themselves, because generally we kind of keep everything in. We don't really show our feelings too much. It was good to see everybody just kind of open up and start to see that we're all kind of going through the same thing, and we all are carrying this baggage.
It tells you about yourself, stuff that you didn't even know was bothering you, stuff that I'm not gonna even speak about. But you feel the need, the urge to need to get it off your chest, and it helps you. And then that blessing for you is gonna bless so many other people that witnesses that and sees that, and they feel what you feel, and they can man, I was going through something similar kind of, and then it's just a snowball effect.
The unit got closer. I think it started when we first started training and we were sitting in that circle, and then each one of us started sharing stories, personal stories that I've never heard from some of these guys. I think that was a door that was open for our unit to start sharing more with each other.
I always thought I had something wrong with me, physically, medically, I should say. And I'll be honest, I find myself self-medicating, meaning, oh, maybe I got a drink here, But it was all because of the stress.
I only have 17 years, right? But in those 17 years, I've seen so much chaos. Gosh. We do suffer from PTSD from the stuff that we see and do out there in the job. And I'm not ashamed to admit it that, yeah, I do have that stuff, and I've suffered from it. This helped me get back into how I was before. This changed my perspective on just life in general. It really did.
To accept that I was angry, take it in, know that I was angry or upset, and then to say, it's okay. That's the mentality I took.
The one thing I took from is that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be fine. It's okay to not have it together.
I'm doing more listening and more of focusing on what's going on now versus what if and the future stuff.
This program helped us all slow down and say, okay, let's try to understand why they have this opinion. And when you take a bigger picture look, it's pretty easy to see.
We have these good conversations, and then you want to put it to work when you get out there and you start talking to people, and it reminds you of a situation that was brought up in the actual circle, and you bring it back out there, and you're like, okay, well, let me see. Don't let me just jump to it. Let me see what they're about. And usually, you find out you got a little bit more in common than you did before, and it makes it a little easier to do your job that way also.
I think listening to that other person who's in distress, that family who had just lost a loved one, someone whose loved one is missing and perhaps suffering from a mental illness. When they call you, the people calling you just want you to hear what they're going through. They want you to take action, but it all starts with listening.
Now it's more like, okay, well, I could see where you're coming from now. It's more like leaving it open and just coming in, with questions versus, oh no, it's this way or the highway type of thing.
When you have the zoom out approach, it slows everything down. You can see the whole entire picture a whole lot quicker. The decision making becomes just as fast as far as resolving, even in the most chaotic form. I had the awareness in the sense of the whole entire view versus such a tunnel view. It's going in open.
Everyone's relationships got stronger. It's something that so strong enough that I took it home and wanted to express it and share it with my kids, and do our little mini version of it. I want this to keep going the rest of my career.
I've lost a lot of friends to suicide, a lot of police officers, and I think if they would have had something where they could have been able to vent or talk about things or better express themselves, I think, things could have been different.
We all wish we had this earlier in our careers and stuff. It probably would have saved marriages. It's almost like a superpower.
I'm so moved by folks opening to this practice. The cops are sitting in what they call huddles because it's easier to talk about it like it's a sports team. And that's fine. We love that folks are making it their own. Everyone benefits from learning to listen from the heart and speak authentically. As we harden into that sense of us and them, we start to fear and sort of disdain the other. We view the other as less than and unworthy and maybe even unlovable. And then, as we've seen, those of us who've been around the world bearing witness to what folks can do to other folks when you start to dehumanize, some very bad things can happen. So we start by looking inside, by being vulnerable. We look inside ourselves, we hold the space with others, and then we ask, who's not here in our circle? Who's not part of our club? And how can we bring them in as well? How is it that we all can have a space to be able to bear witness to each other? We have so much more I'd love to share with you. We don't have the time. Cops and Community Circling Up is one of our initiatives where we take the cops and we take the folks who are the community activists and the formerly incarcerated folks and we start to weave them. And the other initiative is Beyond Us and Them, which is really what is that place. And I'll end with this piece of the beautiful poem by Rumi, The Great Wagon. I love this, and maybe it's sort of full circle here. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Yeah, how do we navigate to that place of abundance and compassion and love? Where do we start? I think counsel asks us to practice settling down, down-regulating and letting go of everything we think we know, opening and listening, bearing witness in the deepest kind of way to each other, and then allowing ourselves to bring forth what serves. This is what we do as we sit and practice in counsel. Counsel encourages us to deepen our listening. Deeper listening builds understanding and empathy. Empathy primes compassion, and compassion primes relationality, and relationship creates cooperation and cohesion, and cooperative and cohesive communities thrive and flourish. I'm so grateful to have this practice, and I'm so grateful to be working with counsel. I thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this, and I hope you find out more about all this wonderful work and that you'll find ways to bring it into your life and to your practice. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Jared, and that was masterful. I only wish we had another hour. I think you could easily fill the time. So I think I would be remiss if I didn't share the URL. Centerforcounsel.org is where you can learn a lot more about the work Jared does, about training, about being trained to be a facilitator and going deeper into this practice. We've got a little bit of time for questions, answers, questions, no answers, comments. Sokyo, if you can help navigate the room, I can't see everyone there. Anybody online, just wave your hand if you've got something. And please feel free to participate. Hoden, thanks.
Hi, Jared. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. I find counsel pretty difficult. I feel very shy in public. And I noticed as you were talking, I can, hear your heart and listen. And as soon as I started I'm going to have to speak. I want to say something. I had a question. I kind of stopped listening as much. And I imagine that with practice, you don't anticipate your own speaking in the circle in counsel. That is a good practice to be able to be in the moment when when it's time to speak. Do you feel like I have that, kind of that perspective correct in your experience?
Thank you for sharing. I think it's always this sort of sense of, yikes, what will I say? And I think folks are so compelling, really. It's a little hard to get that through a Zoom screen, But certainly when you sit in presence with folks and really allow yourself to hear their story, you almost forget that you have to talk next. And somehow you're with the emerging story of the others such that you don't have time to worry. And then understanding that in the spontaneous moment that anything that comes that feels real is really surprising and sometimes uncomfortable, but also a great relief. I think it is a question of getting used to that practice. It's not something that we do often, and it requires a little bit of the sort of props or the theatrics of actually stepping in and being face to face with folks. It's one of the ways I wish we could bring sort of 3 dimensions to Zoom. But I think the more you do it, the more you are really worked by the practice. And counsel teaches you counsel. So I would encourage you to continue your practice. And I think it's completely natural to feel that when it's time to speak, all eyes are on you. That's always something that everyone confronts. Thank you for naming it. We all feel it.
Thanks, Horton.
I did have a question. Do you have prison guards also in circle with prisoners?
There was always an empty chair. We had 20 guys in one empty chair, and then the facilitators. And in that empty chair, we always kind of posed the sort of question, who's not here? And who could be here? Who are the folks that we've invited that couldn't make it, that are no longer with us, that may need it a year from now, or maybe coming up in the neighborhood and want to kind of have a seat held for them? Often it's the correctional officer who we think, man, it would be great one day to sit with them. And in that way, we sort of hold in our heart the possibility. But when they have said, we need this, they've said, we can't sit with them, but we really want to sit by ourselves. We got to go there first. And so we really give them the space to create that. The LAPD is very into creating its own huddle and then slowly thinking about, now, who else could we invite into this? Who could be here in addition to us? And so we bond first and we bridge second.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Odin. That's a great question. I appreciated that. Anyone else here have something? Myoshin, is that your hand, or are you raising it for the room?
Oh yeah, I'm thinking. Jared, thank you so much for sharing that. That was so powerful to hear those stories. Incredibly moving. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I was profoundly moved by that. I immediately wanted to know more. You showed us these video clips from these 2 groups, both of which were on, at least on the surface, different, right? But in our hearts, maybe. That being said, I was so wanting to find out more. Like, oh, what's going to happen next? How is it transforming their lives, working into their careers, into their building bridges in community, outside of community? I guess I'm looking at the 3rd peacemaker tenet, right? Taking action, right? And that was a part that I was really curious about. Any response on that? I'm so curious about that part of it. How I know these are. I'm imagining that these are ongoing councils that these communities have with each other. I just want to. I'm curious to find out what happens, how the transformations occur.
I think we could be here for hours and hours and hours. I would love to take you through all the stories. I will say that on the website, there is the rest of these, and man, it was hard to get it down to 5 minutes each. The video that the cops did was about 3.5 hours of amazing sharing, which we now have a 30-minute version of which this is 5 minutes, where they say, I went to the doctor and my doctor said, I can't believe your blood pressure is so low. What are you doing? And then my wife said to me, how come you're sleeping through the night like this? And why are you so much nicer? And we hear these stories about what's happening in the lives of folks. It's really overwhelming. So I would invite you, if you're interested, to go to the website and see the rest of these videos. Mitch, as I said, was a gentleman who you couldn't see the big swastika on his chest, but he was a member of the Aryan Nation. And so he had an awful big swastika, which was apparent to me and disturbing. And he spoke of what it was to sort of be in his life at this point. Then you see shots of him as he is now, He's got, a beautiful life with a wife and a dog and a beautiful home and does great work, and it works for us as well. It's incredible to see the journey that he took from where he was to where he is now. And just to say that there are thousands and thousands. We have 28 prisons now where there are councils happening. When I went to visit the prison that those three gentlemen were in at Ironwood, I walked in after 6 years of not being there, and I was greeted by a circle. It was being led by men who had been trained, by men who were trained, by men who were trained by men we trained. It had gone 4 generations since we originally were there, and they have actually brought it into their lives such that they initiate those who come next, and then they come home and leave this practice. And to see these men show up on day one and sort of say, what is this? Can I sit in this room with my rivals? With, I'm like, attacking this guy in a riot, and I got to sit next to him. And then by the first afternoon, to see them begin to share things, maybe even share some food. And by the second day, to have them walk out together onto a yard that is so laden with these rules about who can and can't speak with each other. The choice to eat together, the choice to walk together and to see each other is an extraordinary response to this understanding and embodiment of suffering. They're compelled to take action in a beautiful way that actually breaks down racism and eases violence. And it's direct and it's immediate. So these little stories that emerge from just the opportunity to sit with each other for a day or two, and then to think that year after year they're in these councils, and what the benefit is as they continue to offer it to others on the yard is truly extraordinary. I call it generative. It is the most fruitful garden I have ever had any kind of permission to be in, and I'm so inspired by the practice. I learned so much from the practice, and it's really an extraordinary thing to be a part of. So I urge you all to go see more of these stories, reach out, learn about this, bring it into your life, and become a student of this extraordinary, beautiful practice of rehumanizing that happens in council. It's amazing.
Thanks, Jared. We have a few more minutes here, and I might even cheat a little bit if we've got people with questions, if you'd like.
Cindy, Bonnie on this end. My question is very similar, and I think you might have already answered it, but it sounds like these experiences are very transformative when people sit for a day or a few days. What if they don't have or take an opportunity to continue with counsel? Do they start to lose the benefits and the transformations that they had experienced?
Yeah, what a beautiful question. Thank you for that. I think it's very hard to, figure out what the prescription is for how many hours of meditation actually lets you achieve, I don't know what. I know it's a lifelong practice, and as we sit and we have a relationship with the cushion, I think this is a similar kind of arrangement in that we're drawn to practice, and sometimes practicing means just sitting and being uncomfortable and thinking about, why am I uncomfortable? And sometimes it's opening up and sharing an enormous amount. I think the fact that folks remember councils from years ago in which something was said or something was felt means it continues to work them over time. And everybody moves at their own rate, at their own speed. There's a huge diversity in a group, and I'm thinking back to a day ago, there were guys who were just like not going to give anything at the beginning. And to see the journey from completely shut down to kind of eager, to like eyes and a couple of words like, thank you, this is hard for me, but thank you. That's in some ways a greater journey than the person who's used to giving their testimony and sharing for minutes at a time. It was at first something I felt like we needed to get right, that there was the right way to do counsel. And now I realize that the mystery is in just showing up and releasing that which everybody has inside them. And everybody is on their own journey with how they can access that. So I think this is a wonderful reminder. And for some, it'll open a spigot. And for others, it'll just be a sort of an echo that stays with them for days, weeks, months, until it's time to open up. I trust the process. I've seen so many different ways that counsel has been a resource to folks, that whether it happens fast or slow, I feel like just being part of the experience is something that plants a seed. And I have enormous confidence. It's just grown with time. I used to worry about it going well, and now I just know it's an incredible gift, and it will show up in the way that it needs to show up for the person who engages.
Thanks, Cindy. That was a great question. Thank you. And I want to mention, and it's sort of as a equal opportunity plug here. There are opportunities to engage in counsel with Jared's organization as a participant, as well as with Zen Peacemakers. We endeavor to offer counsel once a week of one sort or another. Tomorrow morning there's counsel for mental health workers, and we do. I believe it's once a month, maybe once every 2 weeks. A women's council, women's specific council, and then several others throughout the course of the month. So, and it's something that there are no prerequisites other than just having the faith in yourself to step forward and be vulnerable and share. So, beginners always welcome.
Jeff, I might say that it's wonderful to find a Zoom time that works for you, or to have a group that practices counsel. But what we've learned from working with folks who are incarcerated is you can find ways to open your heart in any circumstance at any time. And so we created this book I'll hold it up for you, for the folks inside prisons. And it became something that we offered the public because it felt like we needed to, sorry.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. The idea is to offer folks an opportunity to be in counsel all the time. And the whole second part of this is activities. We work with Jan Chosen Bays to come up with some simple mindfulness activities, journaling prompts, ways to be in the world such that we can listen from our heart, even when we don't have a circle to go to. It feels important for us to resource folks, and for those who are in prison unable to access their usual weekly counsel or get online. Obviously, there was no internet inside prisons. We wanted to provide them with material so that in their cell they could drop into counsel or their experience of counsel. And so if you're interested in finding ways to extend this beyond the circle, but in the spirit of counsel, we've written a book on it, and it's helped a lot of folks. So
thanks for that, Jared. And actually, the book is right behind me, and I was going to grab it, and so I'm glad you did. That was much more eloquent than I would have been. And in the spirit of cheating the clock just a little bit, if there's one last question anyone has, we can take that if you'd like. Nick, hi, thank you. Thanks for helping me cheat.
Hi, yeah, thank you very much for your talk. It's really inspiring. I'm curious how these participants wind up in these circumstances. Do they volunteer? They sound like they might have some resistance at first, but yeah, maybe could you speak to that for a little bit?
In prisons or in police, or which?
Yeah, either circumstance, or maybe in general, whichever you think would be most fun to talk about.
Yeah, again, I think it's really important to come up with language that makes sense. I think that we need to speak into the listening, and the state of California now supports us in coming into the prisons with a program that folks can participate in as a rehabilitative program. They, receive credit for taking a program, which often is intriguing, but once they sit down and sort of try to kind of understand what it's about, they realize that it is feeding a hunger in many of them. There are some who are not interested in any programs. In prison, there are those who are hungry. They have a deep longing to recover something, to understand something about the causative factors, to understand what it means to go to the parole board and be able to speak about the next chapter of their lives. When they see what we have to offer align with what it is they're drawn to do, it's absolutely like a non-negotiable in their lives. They have to come to this. It becomes theirs, and we give it to them such that they can understand it's the curriculum of their life. As part of our initial training is to look at what it is that needs to be spoken of and how it is they can support each other in moving forward in their lives. And very quickly it becomes theirs, and they own it and connect to it. In the realm of the law enforcement, there are things you cannot say and things you cannot do. Folks will come in with an enormous amount of resistance, and if they feel they're being pushed to do a mandatory training, they will roll their eyes at the minimum. At the maximum, they will come up with all kinds of colorful language and be very sort of resistant to anything that has to do with talking about your feelings. And everybody knows somebody who has committed suicide on the job. Everybody knows somebody who's lost a marriage, who's gotten into some very deep trouble. Everybody knows the flavor of mental illness that comes from this. And they also see that folks are dying in their 50s. The average life expectancy after retirement has shrunk to less than 10 years. In many cases, it's 5 to 7 years. So if you're not going to make it to your mid 60s, and that's what this job is doing, because you are not taught how to manage stress, what it is to bring on, a parasympathetic response in a time when you're so overwhelmed but no longer on watch. It's damaging your health. So we found ways to introduce this as a resource to keep you healthy, to extend your life, to be able to be something that helps you enjoy your retirement, and to take advantage of all the tools you have to be able to thrive in your career and make it beyond your career. I think when we can connect with those things that folks see are of great value, and we don't get stuck talking about the jargon of the 3 tenets or anything. I would never wear my rakusu when I walk into the police department. There are things that are signals that this is other, and we need to be very careful to find underneath it the common truth about how it is that we are able to support our health and well-being, and that relationships are important, such that they can see that it is in fact their story and it is a benefit to them. And again, once they see that, once they watch the blood pressure going down, once they watch the fact that they're actually sleeping through the night and their family, their kids want to hang out with them, they realize something is going on here that is of benefit, and it's something they want more of. And so you get things like this officer saying, I don't want this to stop. I want this to happen throughout my career. I can't think about continuing to be a police officer without having my counsel huddle. And that's the greatest way this thing sustains itself. We have found ways to listen. Our practice is to listen, and to listen deeply to folks' longing. And when we're able to language counsel in a grant proposal or in a pitch to a donor that aligns with the folks longing for this work, then we're able to create some success with it. But it requires some humility, and it requires really listening to where the great need is, and there is a great need everywhere. So that's generally kind of what I have to say. People come to this with some skepticism, but when they recognize it as being part of their story and their path and a benefit to them, they make it their own real quick.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you very much. Thanks for the question too, Nick. And we've gone over a bit, but it was wonderful. I'm so happy. We had some great questions and wonderful answers from Jared. Jared, we're going to sit until 25 after. You are heartily invited and welcome to join us if you'd like. I also know you're busy and you have family, and if you need to exit, we understand, and that would be okay as well.
Thank you, Jeff.
So I once again, I really want to heartily thank you for your time and your heart. And hopefully this is just a little taste of inspiration for everyone. And maybe some among us will, take a next step and explore a little bit further.